So, hi everyone, I'm Michael Wayne, and today I feel honored. I have the author Mark Nepo with me. And Mark, thank you for making the time. It truly is an honor.
Oh,
And,
great to be with you again. Absolutely.
yeah, and yeah, the time before when we were together, and that was live. We remember the good old days. We sat in
Right.
the same room with cameras. It was in November 2016 at the Open Center in New York, and it was just the Friday of election week. It was, I think, Veterans Day, actually, and here we are again, meeting a few weeks after this year's election. And we talked about the election last time, and in a little bit we can talk about it again, because there's yeah,
Sure.
yeah.
Sure.
So yeah, that'd be great. So first I'll just introduce you. It's a matter of introduction that you're a best-selling author. Your best known book perhaps is The Book of Awakening, which this year came out as a 20th anniversary edition. And it's one of your 22 books, and you're poet, teacher, and storyteller. And you've been described as one of the finest spiritual guides of our time and an eloquent spiritual teacher. Your work's widely accessible. Oprah Winfrey's had you on the show numerous times. You've been on national media, Good Morning America, and so on. So yeah, so I could go on, but again, thank you, Mark.
Oh,
And I,
really a joy. Yeah.
yeah, and I would say the gift of your writing is that you're profoundly able to touch people by just deeply touching their soul. You do this in your most recent book, The Book of Soul, 50 Paths to Living What Matters, and The Book of Awakening. So just as an overview question, what would you consider to be the themes that inform and drive you, and a common thread that connects everything you do?
Yeah. So I think, humbly as I get older too, I think it's always been the the vow to be as alive as possible, which has led to being as authentic as possible. And that has, looking back, there seems to be some sense in the books, which are all inquiries. I don't write. I've written a lot of books because I write about what I don't know, and if I only wrote about what I know, it'd be very little. Um, and look at, and so wanting to be as alive as possible, realizing that is a incarnate journey that everyone who's ever lived is suddenly by birth thrust into, and that no matter how we stumble or veer or run from that journey, great love and great suffering bring us back, and that's the only way that so if we look at my books, they are things like awakening, the exquisite risk, finding inner courage, 7,000 ways to listen. And all of these have been thresholds to, okay, how do we stay authentic? How do we stay vulnerable? How do we open the heart to let everything in the universe in and to let soul out? And how do we keep returning? Because one thing I think that is a theme for me, and it's just, what I offer are examples, not instructions. I don't know, maybe someone can be arrive at an enlightened state, but that's not been my journey on earth. There are moments of enlightenment, maybe even long moments of feeling totally alive and clear, and then we trip taking the garbage out or lose our way or stub our toe, or and so it's always another theme for me, and everything is we're always on this practice of return.
Hmm.
Medieval monks, when asked how they practiced their faith, would say by falling down and getting up. And I love that. And I think it's very relevant right now, because I think that we're being, this global pandemic has forced us into a global Sabbath.
Hmm.
The word Sabbath in the Jewish tradition literally means the one day we don't turn one thing into another. And, for months now, we've been forced all over the world to stop. to stop running, to stop scheming, even to stop dreaming, to stop chasing, to stop bending, manipulating. Just stop with the quiet courage to see the miracle that's in everything. And so, that echoes back, in my 30s, as you know, I almost died from a rare form of lymphoma. And, one of the things that was so striking, that I'm sure this is happening to a lot of people, that the collective trauma is touching on personal traumas, bringing stuff up. And, but, I remember when I was first diagnosed, I went to this doctor. I had a huge tumor growing on my skull, though I wasn't in pain, and so I went to this appointment where I was told I had cancer. And of course I was like frightened and incredulous, and you must have the wrong folder. It's not me. And, but when I left that appointment, the door I had come through to keep that appointment was gone. There was no way back to life before that moment. And that's come up for me because I feel that's happened to us globally in humanity because of this pandemic. The old world is gone. It's gone. And that's shocking and disturbing, and it engenders a lot of loss and grief. And so then if we look, which I've reflected on recently, if you remember, recall Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and her stages of grief.
Yeah.
And, if folks who are listening or seeing us don't remember, she was the mother of the modern hospice movement. Of course, hospice has been going on forever, but she was the mother of the modern hospice movement. And she witnessed, looking at so much loss and end of life and grief, that there were these 5 stages that, not necessarily in order or sequence, but like a constellation that people with loss and grief bounce around in. We might get stuck in some, and they are anger, denial, bartering, depression, and acceptance. Well, even now, look at our society, look at our recent election. We have a huge part of our society is stuck in denial, both about the pandemic and about the election. No, there's no pandemic. No. Well, yes, there is. I can go where I want, and then we have, look, it's ravaging the country, and we have people in, over these months stuck in anger. I'm not going to you're not going to tell me to wear a mask. What are we protesting? Biology, gravity, air? And that becomes crazy. That becomes crazy making. Because eventually I think we need each other to accept what is, so we can live into what's next.
Yeah, it's thank you for bringing it to what's going on in our world right now with people, and giving the analogy of Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's groundbreaking work, the bargaining and kind of the death of the old in a way to come to something new. And
well, in very, if we look at, and I'm so interested in the origin of words, not because I'm a word geek, but because, like in nature, elements are eroded over time. Through erosion, words erode. And often I found that their original meaning before erosion are much more helpful and whole and useful. So one word is the word sacrifice. There's a lot of amazing sacrifice, noble sacrifice. We think of that historically in terms of war and people even giving their life for the common good. But we have all these, these frontline healthcare workers who are sacrificing so much. But acts of sacrifice are like the flowers and shrubs that grow out of the soil of sacrifice. And that soil goes to the original definition of the word sacrifice, means to give up what no longer works in order to stay close to what is sacred. To give up what no longer works in order to stay close to what is sacred. And this is very relevant right now, personally and in humanity and in our society, because when we're forced to stop, when things are breaking, there's these questions that keep recurring. One is what needs to be repaired? What needs to be reimagined? Not just repaired? And what needs to stay dismantled? Like institutional racial injustice, so we're being forced personally and collectively to say, what's no longer working, and now we need to give it up to get close again. And so I feel, that we are called, and yes, we look at the most recent election, which, on the one hand, it's remarkable. We have more people than ever, almost 80 million people who voted and brought in, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And yet we also have 73 million people who voted for Trump. And I have felt, as we talked 4 years ago all along, that my reaction to Trump and Trumpism is not political. It's at a level of human decency. It's at the crossroads between self-interest and compassion. And when I did my book More Together Than Alone, which was on community and people working together over time in different cultures, I found repeatedly that fear, and this is throughout all history, all different, when fear makes us think that self-interest will save us, great love and great suffering affirm that the only way out is that we're more together than alone. And so what I see happening today, which has happened in other times, but not in this way, all things are true. All things aren't fair. All things aren't just, but all things are true. And so we have these two truths at once. We have the dawn of a new day, and we have the retreat into an isolated, self-interest, fear-driven cruelty at the same time.
Yeah, that's a really good phrase, the self-interested cruelty, because that's what it seems like we were dealing with over the last 4 years. And it seems like there's always this a pendulum swing between individualism, individual cruelty, perhaps, and mutual aid, or more together than alone, with your title, or collaborative. And I don't know if it's 3 steps forward, 2 steps back, yin and yang, the dynamic of yin and yang, but perhaps this time around, because it was just so cruel, just so base, that perhaps this is more people are going to awaken to that more together than alone understanding, would you say?
Well, I think that, there's a couple of things. I don't think we'll ever eliminate this pendulum swing. I think that it is part of the challenge of incarnation for every single person that ever lives. And it's our turn. It's our turn. And, there's two stories here I would tell. One, when this always happens, when as soon as you finish a book, then you come upon something that belongs in the book. It's just published, and you go, why didn't I read that before? And that happened with the community book for me, when I came across this amazing, I think, metaphor that came from reading Neil deGrasse Tyson, the wonderful physicist he's the director of the Museum of Natural History in New York. And he had a small book out a few years ago called Astrophysics for People in a Hurry. And it wasn't that was kind of a flip title. It wasn't anything but watered down, but it was a very dense and profound read. But he was offering his, as a physicist, his and I would say imagination for how the universe began, because of course, who knows, right? Um, and and he talked about how in the first few seconds, um, there was a conflict between matter and antimatter. Matter was known as photons and antimatter as hadrons. And when there was 1,000,000,001 photons and 1,000,000,000 hadrons, just one more, poof, the universe came into existence. And he says how then when the planets, when the Earth was settling into its orbit, if it had settled a little closer to the sun, all the oceans would have evaporated and there'd be no life. And if it settled a little farther away, they would have frozen and there would be no life. And I was so struck by what a small gesture we're here. And I couldn't, as I kept like that wouldn't let go of me. And as I was, doing the groceries and filling up the car with gas and driving around town, it hit me. This isn't a description of how the universe began. This is the description of an ongoing creation. Every day, it takes one more photon to ensure that life continues. It takes one more gesture of kindness. It takes one more effort of light over dark, of give over take, to ensure that the universe is here tomorrow. And I think this is the purpose of goodness. This is and one of the great humbling aspects of this law of spiritual physics, if you will, is that we never know what gesture it'll be. So, it might be if after we talk and you go out to the pharmacy and someone trips in the parking lot and you help them pick up their goods, that might be the one gesture that keeps life going tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
And so that gives us a very functional, vibrant form of faith. Faith is participating in that goodness, knowing that you'll never know if it was your gesture or not.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me of two sayings, what you were just saying. One is the famous saying, I don't know if it comes from the Bible or where it comes from. I think this is the famous saying, but there, but for the grace of God go I. Just talking about the creation of the planets, or our planet, a little closer to the sun, we wouldn't be here. And then just that ability to help people, because that may not be us, but that is us. And then I think of the Dalai Lama saying that his religion is kindness.
Yeah, and kindness, it's not by accident that kindness has the same root as the word for kinship. So one of the rewards for kindness, beyond good relationship, and that it does help us be more together than alone, is that when we're kind and we give, it reveals to us in a felt way our kinship with all things.
Mm-hmm.
So the other story that then I think this is all relevant right now is, it's fear, that old, archetypal choice between love and fear. And there's a lot of fear because fear is the other virus, right? Fear is the other virus. And we can talk about fear, but this is a parable about this choice between compassion and self-interest. It's every generation, every life has to face. We have to face it every day. And so there's these two monks who study long and hard, because after enough study, they're going to keep an appointment at the top of a mountain with Buddha.
Mm.
So this is a very special thing, right? And so the day comes and they start hiking up the mountain, and halfway up the mountain, one of the monks falls and breaks his leg. So they spend the night, and the other monk takes care of him, fully believing that he will leave him comfortable and keep his appointment with Buddha, doesn't want to pass that up.
Mhm.
And the next day, well, the one who broke his leg isn't doing very well. He has a fever, and it's clear it's not that simple. You just can't leave him there. And the parable stops there, and the question then is turned to the listener, the viewer, the reader. What would you do? And when you have more people, and again, let's apply this to our age right now. Let's apply it to, when you have more people who would keep their appointment at the top of the mountain than care for their broken other, you engender an age of cruelty.
Mhm.
When you have more people who would stop and discover that caring for their broken other is the summit, you engender an age of compassion. And it doesn't matter what you put on the top of that mountain. Could be Buddha, could be God, could be security, could be wealth, could be you want to take care of all your children, could be you want to have be seen as successful and remember what you name it. When you insist on what's at the top of that mountain over those you encounter along the way, you're leaning toward cruelty.
Mhm. Yeah, well, we have to thank you, Mark, for being a constant teacher of this for us. And so I want to talk about your two books, the Book of Awakening, the Book of Soul. It came out this year, but I have one last question or thing to add to what you were saying on cruelty. Talking about Trump and the 74 million people who voted for him. In that, some of those people are also can be kind people. They're oriented towards family and their tribe or their religion. So it's kind of a paradox in a certain way. I'm just kind of.
Well, yeah, let's clarify that. I didn't mean to
And no, I understand what you mean about cruelty on the one hand.
well, I think I didn't mean to indicate or suggest that all those people are cruel by nature. What I'm suggesting is that throughout history, for all of us, individually and collectively, I think the difference, we often hurt each other or are cruel inadvertently.
Hmm.
Often fear makes us act in a way that engenders cruelty when we didn't mean to. And that to me is the difference between uh, just being human and being evil. Evil to me is knowingly being cruel.
Yeah.
You knowingly. And so I would have to say, in my opinion, that some of the actions of Trump himself have been cruel. He has knowingly caused harm and death. Um, and so I don't think all of those people who voted for him are knowingly cruel or evil, but I think that people who once were afraid, we make different decisions because then fear puts a certain glasses over our eyes. And so this, to move for a little bit here, we're in an unusual kind of, I think, perfect technological storm that's been brewing for maybe 25 years. And there's a recent documentary, The Social Dilemma, which I highly recommend. I don't know if you've seen it. Yeah, and so in that movie, I mean, the documentary, what it really conveys, as you know, is that since the beginning of social media and things like Google and Facebook and Twitter, these through the desire for profit above all else, that thing at the top of the mountain, they've developed a technology that all it does is keep mirroring to the user what they already know and what they already want and what they're already afraid of. And so, like an infinite prism, people have been given individualized facets of the prism, and over all these years we each now take that as reality, and we've lost a common sense of reality, which is what all the spiritual traditions and where we started about being authentic and real and vulnerable is the only way to touch down into the one eternal foundational reality that all human beings share. And without that, we're adrift. You add to that the fact that this, what I would call the reality TV uh, era, when you go back and you think that Reagan was the first actor elected president, you know, back then that was an oxymoron. You know, that what was not real was now playing in the realm of what was real. And when you go all the way fast forward and through all of what we're talking about, Trump became kind of the Frankenstein monster of the inability to see what is acting and what is real, what is pretend and what is truth. So much to the point that we've gone past the era of mistaking what's false for true into an era where people are deliberately uh, supporting what is knowingly untrue.
Mm-hmm.
And so you juxtapose that, or you align that with this prism of social media dispersing everybody away, forget, it's the opposite of more together than alone. And so now we're in this perfect kind of storm where we need to regain, um, literally need to regain our humanity. And so there's one other story here that why I'm hopeful, even though there's so much suffering and pain. You know, years ago, I don't know if you've ever been down US 1 on the coast in California.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and that it's a spectacular, rocky, beautiful ride. And years ago, first time I was teaching like in northern, north of San Francisco, and I took a week and I rented a car and I drove down to LA and flew back from there. But up around Monterey, I was stopped. It was a rough day, and the sea was just crashing everywhere. And out there are these little rocky, small, almost like little stone islands just cropped up very, quarter of a mile off the coast. And this day I was standing and the wind was whipping, the water was raging. And on this one, the entire surface of it was covered with sea creatures. I mean, there wasn't a space of rock visible. There were, otters and sea lions and cormorants and gulls and everything. And, and normally they would be territorial. There would be spaces. You might find a few gulls over here and a sea lion over there. But the sea was rough, and they all needed to get a place up of an oasis, a safety place. And so they were literally asleep on one another. And I realized that they had exhausted their differences. And when they had exhausted their differences, there was room for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
I think that we, as humanity, are on the verge of exhausting ourselves of our differences.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a very hopeful way, because I think a lot of us are wondering, how are we going to heal this divide, as you say, that what social media has done. And it's, as I pointed out first, that a lot of Trump supporters are good people, but they've been pushed to see the darkness by these evil demagogic psychopaths. And so it's really, really being called now to find that way to exhaust ourselves, or to bridge that healing and come together again. We'll never be 100% together. We'll always be diverse and different, but not so split and polarized the way we are.
Yeah, and I think, I of course, don't know what will happen, and I'm sure it's not going to be, I'm sure it's going to take a long time, but I do believe that talk and persuasion and argument and manipulation are really useless.
Mhm.
When we feel each other, I mean, we need an education. This is the time when we need an education of kind of on the moment street compassion, you know, where we literally, feel for each other and act on that. And that's how we become that one photon. You go back in Chinese philosophy and culture, and there was a philosopher, Mencius, who lived in 300s. And he was a couple hundred years or more actually after Confucius. But he spoke about that human beings were innately kind. And his metaphor was, he said, if water is allowed its true nature, water will always flow downhill and join other water. You can manipulate water to even go uphill or dam it or force it or channel it. But allowed its true nature, water will always flow and join other water. And he said, so too human beings. We can be manipulated or manipulate ourselves to go against our true nature, which I think we're seeing a lot of, and um, and which happens in every age. But allowed our true nature, we will always flow and join each other.
Mhm. Yeah. And I think that it was telling that Joe Biden's one of his taglines of things he was saying was restoring the soul of America. Almost like a page out of one of your books in a way.
Yeah. Well, I think he's a good man and with a good heart. And he personally, again, under politics, under parties, um, he has suffered, he has loved and suffered and loved.
Hmm.
And therefore, he knows he is the perfect leader for a time of great suffering
Uh-huh.
because he has such a big heart.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's you write about that in your books that we're born open, but then we we lose trust. We're born with a sense of trust, we lose trust, we suffer, and then the question is, do we regain that sense of trust, or do we say closed and
Well, I
jaded?
think this might be the one of the quietest courages we all need is the experience by its nature will time to time push us away.
Mm-hmm.
And regaining trust is leaning back in. Precisely when we're closed, we need to open. Precisely when we're pushed away, we need to hold nothing back.
Mm-hmm.
And even when we're, that is, I think, one of the throughout history has been one of the challenge points is, if I feel betrayed, this is where the Buddhists speak about seeing things as they are. If I feel betrayed, if I have been, my trust has been betrayed and I'm hurt, well, I need not to make a worldview out of that hurt.
Mm-hmm.
I need to see things as they are and learn how to better discern who is trustworthy, but not make a worldview that there's nothing to trust anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think that is also infecting our humanity because fear will say, fear everything, fear everything. And so that's like, me using a stove and I burn myself. And then rather than learn how to better use the stove, I say, stay away from stoves.
Mm-hmm.
And then I teach my children, no, stay away from that stove. You'll learn.
Mm-hmm.
You'll learn. Stoves can't be trusted. And now just replace stove with whatever you want. Love.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your recent book, the Book of Soul, 50 Paths to Living What Matters, you early on in the book, you kind of sum up what you were just saying when you write, the central inquiry of the book is how we inhabit the soul on earth through a messy life, living tenderly and authentically enough that we can be who we are everywhere and create a path to what matters. So that's basically what you're saying.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And humbly, no one knows how to do that. And that's been the human journey on Earth. I think life has been made just difficult enough that we need each other. And uh, one of the sicknesses, modern sicknesses, is to think that we don't need, that we can make it alone.
Hmm.
That we think that we don't need anybody. Everybody, no one can live your life. This is one of the central paradoxes of being alive. No one can live your life for you, but no one can make it alone.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a big myth of the American archetype of, yeah, it's rugged individualism and we're all cowboys and we just live high on the horse and out in the range.
Well, this has been one of, each, just the way people have gifts and shadows, each culture has a strength and a liability. And in the West, our strength is more than any other culture. We have developed this sense of individualism. Whereas you take in Africa, especially, and in the East, the sense of relationship and community and interdependence
Uh-huh.
is in the foreground. And there, culturally, it's actually harder to develop a sense of individualism. And so these are all great things. We need the best of all cultures. And the liability, the shadow here, it's not by accident that in the West, narcissism and self-centeredness is rampant more than in any other culture on earth.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that it sure is. Um, yeah. So in the Book of Soul, it seems you're writing about like basically the human experience, the universal journey that we all go through of love, suffering, humility, and so if we stay open to it, where can this journey take us?
Well, it's, it wonderfully, it takes us right where we are, only more full, by being completely who we are right where we are, we reveal heaven on earth.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, now of course we're not traveling, but and I hope we'll get to travel again. But in all my teaching through the years and all, I've been, blessed to literally go all over the world. And when I get wherever I'm going, I go there to affirm for people that there's nowhere to go. And I'm happy to do it. And of course, we're traveling on the surface distances to be together. But when we're authentic, uh, it all opens to the same moment, that there is nowhere to go. And that's really, why the Book of Awakening, the subtitle is, having the life you want by being present to the life you have.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean we don't work toward things, but often the dreams, I believe in giving our all to our dreams and what we want to work toward. But we all know that most of the time our dreams don't come true. So why do we do this? Because if I give my all to that, sometimes we come true.
Mm-hmm.
That's more important.
Yeah. Yeah, these are like what you're talking about are really teachings of true enlightenment, of not climbing the mountain to find it, but being with yourself to find it, and accepting who you are, and always trying to be that better version.
Well, one of the challenges for everyone, and this is an ongoing practice, which is why one of my books is called The Endless Practice, because there's no end to it. There's no arrival point. But one of the things, by living, it's like the window. I have a window here in my study, right here where I am. And of course, the window gets dirty and then I clean it. And then it gets dirty and then I clean it. Well, being dirty isn't a bad thing and being clean isn't a good thing. These are more like, again, like spiritual physics. By living, we get covered. And to clean the window as a human being, that is by loving and accepting and introspection and care. That's how we, insight, reflection. This is how we clean the window of the heart, of the mind, of the soul. But every time we clean our window, we get an inch of wisdom.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're constant, the goal isn't to stay clean or dirty. There are whole philosophies, you know, Puritanism is don't ever get dirty, keep your windows spotless. But then, you know, nihilism and extreme realism, you know, like Emile Zola, you know, in France, that no, they made it a holy journey. No, let's get dirty. Let's stay dirty. It's the gritty, real, that, you know, and it's not either. This is an ongoing going process. And so what do we have in each of us in our toolkit that helps us stay in experience and then clean our windows and then get back in experience?
Yeah. And you're teaching a course in January online, obviously. Find
Yes.
Inner Courage, a 3-session course.
Yeah, so I've been, you know, I'm offering these webinars now while we're you know not able to travel, and so and people who are interested, details are at live.marknepo.com, and people can register there. But they're 3 Sundays from 1 to 2:30 each Sunday, January 24, 31, and February 7th, and I'll be exploring finding inner courage, our walk in the world, which is very much about how do we personalize and inhabit our own practices of a lot of the things we're talking about, which seems so needed. Uh, like I said, we each have to figure out how to do this, and yet we need each other to be able to do it.
Yeah, and finding inner courage was kind of basically sums up what you were just saying before I said you're teaching this course, finding inner courage, because it's cleaning the window is really that courage to do so, because it's, you know, it's like the veil of illusion that Buddhism talks about. It can be easier in certain ways to keep that veil on instead of cleaning the veil or removing the veil or cleaning the window, and it does take
Yes,
courage.
absolutely. And of course the exciting but also scary thing about being so real is that we will be changed by everyone and everything we encounter. Life doesn't
Yeah,
stay still, it's dynamic.
yeah, uh-huh. Yeah, and there's a certain amount of like finding inner courage, opening up your own vulnerabilities and your own humility to do so. And it reminds me of another chapter in your book, the Book of Soul, widening our circle. And you say, well, you say first, you say so much depends on letting in more views than our own. And you say I confess that you, after a lifetime of experience, I still wake some days feeling small. When smaller than I really am, it's hard to stay connected to everything larger than me. And you know, I'm sure anybody who reads that will appreciate that you're confessing to your own times of smallness and falling off the wagon, but which, you know, makes you, you know, vulnerable, and your own inner courage to say that.
Well, and of course, I mean, and it's just so true that, you know, this is one of the things I learned by even by that moment is when we when we see ourselves as small compared to everything else through our mind, we are diminished. When I feel my connection as a small part in the living universe through presence and kindness and compassion and authenticity, I am not made insignificant. I am a stitch in the universal fabric.
Mm-hmm.
So this is again, so the difference is, you know, yeah, we often through our mind, so what is that? We often compare in our mind. Well, I've learned that whenever I compare or count, I can't be present. And the only way to affirm my own place and worth is by being present, not by counting or comparing.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so we hear that and we go, well, then I won't count or compare. Oh, yes, we will, because we're human. But that's what I mean about a practice of return. The work of self-awareness is to recognize, oh, I'm counting or comparing. Drop it.
Uh-huh.
Be present.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's when we connect better to one another. Um, yeah. So Yeah, I want to go back to this post-election conversation in the little time we have left, because I remind you before we went live that when you and I talked in 2016, you said you couldn't believe 63 million at that time. That's how many people voted for Trump were in pain and wounded, and now we're 74 million. So I wonder, how can we help? I mean, we've kind of talked about this, but how do we get people, that number of people, to move past their pain and woundedness and to
Well,
live
I
back
think
to.
I think sir, first off, I don't know. Let's just start there.
Yeah, yeah.
um, but let me speak to what it said, how it touches me in my heart, and I feel, we have to, we can't, I can't imagine moving all those people. I think it has to start in our individual one-on-one. It's the photon
Hmm.
and the hadron. We go back to the soul level. If every soul on earth is a cell in the global body, we have to work toward making each soul more healthy so that the global body will be more healthy. And I think that goes back to basic things that are not abstract, but that are ancient and timeless, that we practice, holding, listening, hearing, compassion.
Hmm.
So not dismissing people's pain. The only time, during this time, during these 4 years, during all of this time, I have always felt I will welcome anyone into a circle I'm teaching, except those intent on destroying the circle.
Yeah.
So I don't know how else to do it. So if someone wants to talk about their pain and share their pain, then that can be held and honored and and supported in healing themselves. But if out of fear and the resistance to look at their own pain, they want to smash and destroy other things and people, but I don't know how, I can't be a
Hmm.
part of that.
Yeah.
So I think that is age old too. So I think that all we can do is, and this is an interesting, I had one of my students in one of the, I do before the COVID, and I will again on the other side, I've offered year-long journeys for a small group of people, and and I had a wonderful student in there who's our age, um and she had, after all this time, she grew up with a cousin. They were very close as kids. And during the life, they'd become, she remained very open. He became very kind of closed and, conservative and even fundamentalist in his thinking. But a lot of their people in their family were passing away. And he reached out to her and said, gee, I'd love to spend more time like when we were kids. And she shared with the group, she said, I don't know where it came in me, but my answer to him was, I would love that, but only if we can share our experience and not our conclusions.
Hmm.
And I think that's profound. I think there's real wisdom in that that's usable here. So how do we keep asking for and listening to stories? Not just stories of people who are like us. That's how we got here.
Hmm.
But so if you're conservative and I'm liberal and you have this very strong feeling about abortion, not to talk about our conclusions, but for me to ask you, I see this as very important to you. Can you tell me the story of how this became so significant in your life? We may never agree about the topic, but we are doing root work. We're watering the roots, as a gardener would say. And I think one of the things we need now more than ever is more stories, to tell our stories honestly and to listen to stories and receive them honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, I know there was a project, I think it was called America in a Room, where people were brought together. I think it was last year, people of varying diverse viewpoints, and people were able to hear and see each other. It was a few-day event, I believe, and and the New York Times had an article about it a month or two ago, just reviewing it and what people were up to and what were they thinking. And it was really moving to read it, how just like you were saying, when people come together and they hear each other and realize they have more in common than not, they can start seeing each other as, you
Well,
know.
stories are medicine. They've always been.
Mhm,
Stories have carried, before we had universities and degrees and all kinds of programs for learning, and the world's quandaries and wisdom were carried in story.
mhm.
And stories can be the photons too.
Yeah, well, maybe that will be what will help us. And of course, someone like yourself, Mark, writing stories or writing things that people can access and really can touch their heart and their soul, really is helpful. And that's why, like your new book, The Book of Soul, 52 Paths to Living What Matters. Each chapter is like a week, or
Yeah, and I intend that, like, people who know my work, like, I know, thank you, you do. I encourage all my readers not to speed read through the books, but to linger in the story of your own life while you're that's why this one, I encourage people, like, read a chapter a week, then live your life, listen to your own story, come back and read a chapter, and I, in all my books, I offer uh, journal questions and conversation questions to try to personalize where these things live in your own life with you and your loved ones.
Mhm. Yeah, that's beautiful and wonderful. So as you said, then the next public teaching you're doing will be the Finding Inner Courage and
Yes.
webinar, and then you'll be doing further webinars.
Yeah. And so, yeah, I'll be offering these webinars about 3 times a year. And also, with everything happening with COVID, if people just go to my website, marknepo.com, there'll be updates on what online things I'm doing. And once we're able to travel again, we'll start doing that too.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I thank you so much, Mark. It's much appreciated. I appreciate you and for taking the time and for helping light the way and these.
Oh, well, I'm so glad. Thank you. Thank you too. It's great to be with you.
Thanks, Mark, and I'll see you again. Yeah. Okay. Well, take care.
All right, you too.
Okay.